Have you ever walked into a room filled with laughter and bright lights, yet felt nothing but emptiness inside? You stood there, still breathing, still forcing a smile, still keeping up appearances, but deep down, you knew no one truly saw you. Not because you were invisible, but because everyone was too busy living in their own world. They didn't see how much you were holding in. They didn't notice the fear you were hiding. And then one day, you stopped waiting for them to look back. Not because you gave up, but because you woke up to the truth. No one is coming to save you, and you no longer need them to. In a society where people chase validation like oxygen, you suddenly feel a strange relief when you realize no one truly cares how you're living. No one is keeping a scorecard of your failures. No one is grading your life. And that exact moment when you stop performing, stop proving, stop trying to become a socially acceptable version of yourself is when you begin to walk. No longer living for someone else's gaze. No longer waiting to be understood. You live for yourself, for the values you believe in, for the peace that needs no applause. In this video, we won't learn how to stop caring, but how to stand firm. Not how to isolate ourselves, but how to remain steady in solitude. Because when you accept that you only have yourself, that is not weakness. That is strength. When you let go of the need for recognition, you begin to see what truly deserves your respect. And when you stop waiting for someone to stand by your side, you'll learn how to stand tall even on your own. That is the Stoic spirit and the path back to a self you've abandoned for far too long. 1. The prison in your mind never had walls. There are prisons that need no bricks, no guards, no judgment from anyone else. They are built quietly, day by day, with your own fear. It's the feeling that you must live a certain way just to avoid disappointing others. It's the mornings when you wear a shirt, not because you like it, but because it looks appropriate. It's when you stay silent, though you want to speak, afraid they'll think you're a bother. It's the nights you lie awake not from insomnia, but from replaying a moment in the day. That prison isn't outside. It's inside your mind. And the terrifying part is, you don't realize you're living in it until you can no longer breathe. What holds you back isn't other people, it's the belief that other people are watching. You live as if the whole world is a stage and everyone's judging you. You tense up so no one misunderstands you, act normal to avoid being labeled weird, and try to please people who don't even care about you. But the truth is, no one's watching you as closely as you think. They don't have the time to track your every move, every word, every mistake. Because they're too busy fighting their own shadows. What they care about most, just like you, is themselves. And no matter how hard you try, you'll never be the center of someone else's emotional map. You're a side character in their world, but you've made them the judge in yours. Marcus Aurelius said something every modern person needs to remember. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That quote isn't meant to make you indifferent. It's meant to help you see that the place you feel trapped in might not be real. You think others are watching you, but that's just the echo of your own insecurity. You think their eyes are full of judgment, but it's a gaze you've projected onto them. The criticism you fear most of it was never even said. The laughter you think is aimed at you might have nothing to do with you, and the expectations you carry so heavily could be pure imagination. Freedom doesn't come when you finally please everyone. Freedom comes the moment you accept one truth. You don't need permission to live right. The walls around you weren't built by others, they were built by you, every time you denied yourself just to feel accepted. You call it caution, politeness, diplomacy. But if you have to sacrifice who you are to fit in, that's no longer character. It's confinement. A prison built from forced consent, constant performance, and polite silence. And that prison, ironically, is decorated with praise, but inside, it slowly corrodes your self-respect. The most frightening thing isn't being limited by others. It's when you limit yourself just to avoid being judged. You avoid dreams out of fear of failure. You delay action out of fear of criticism. You suppress emotions out of fear of appearing weak. And gradually, you forget who you once were, what you once wanted, what you once dared to imagine. You become so cautious that you lose your courage, so understanding that you abandon yourself. You live as a safe copy instead of a brave original. But the moment you look back and see the truth, the walls in your mind begin to crack. You realize you owe no one an explanation for your own life. You realize you don't need to perform, don't need to shrink, don't need to censor yourself just to be easier to accept. And the strange thing is, when you stop living for outside approval, you begin to radiate an energy others can't ignore. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you're no longer afraid to disappoint. Not because you're rebellious, but because you've stopped compromising. Not because you've become special, but because you dared to become yourself again. When you stop bowing to invisible expectations, you begin to stand tall as a free person. No one can control your mind unless you let them in. No one can shrink your life unless you hand over the wheel. And no one can save you if you don't rise from the seat where you condemned yourself. A Stoic is not someone without fear. They are someone who knows fear but doesn't let it dictate their path. They don't tear down walls with screams but with quiet resolve. They don't need someone to unlock the gate because the key has always been in their hands. 2. The audience. You're performing for never existed. But beyond the prison in your mind lies an even subtler illusion. The feeling that you're constantly being watched. An invisible stage you've built yourself, with imagined spotlights, imagined eyes, and an audience you believe is waiting to judge your every move. You're not just confining yourself. You're living like an actor, one who's not allowed to step out of character. And ironically, the better you perform, the harder it becomes to find the way out. Sometimes you walk into a room, and before anyone speaks, you've already adjusted your posture, your tone, your facial expression as if you were facing a panel of judges. You share something personal, then instantly regret it for fear of saying too much. You post a status, then delete it, not because it's wrong, but because you fear it might be misunderstood. You live as if someone is always observing, analyzing, judging you. But the truth is, no one pays as much attention to you as you think. No one has the time or energy to be a full-time spectator in your life. They're too busy managing the drama in their own. That's what most young people don't realize. It's not the world making you feel seen, it's you projecting that gaze onto everyone. And in doing so, you become the one operating the spotlight, shining it on yourself, then panicking from the exposure. But in reality, the theater is empty. The anxiety you feel doesn't come from a crowd, it's the echo of your own mind. When you stop imagining an audience watching you, you'll realize no one's watching at all. They're not there. They never were. Marcus Aurelius once said, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks." That wasn't the advice of someone cold. It was the awakening of a man who carried an empire and still chose to protect his inner calm. He understood that the only thing you can control is how you act, not how others react. And freedom only arrives when you stop trading pieces of yourself to please someone who was never truly present. When you perform, you live in a split state. One part is your true self yearning to live honestly. The other is the version you believe others want to see, always adjusting, always guarded, always calculating. These two parts never align. They clash, contradict, and drain you. That's why you feel lost. That's why you feel empty even when many like you. And that's why you can't feel genuine joy, because there is no real audience listening to the real you. Ironically, the moment you stop performing, you become more compelling. Not because you found a better role, but because you stopped playing one altogether. Your directness becomes your magnetism, your calm becomes your strength, and your imperfections become what others trust. Because in a world where everyone pretends to be fine, the one who admits they're not is the one people actually believe. You don't need to impress. You only need to show up as your original self. And you don't have to withdraw from the world. Living authentically doesn't mean isolation, but you must learn the difference between sharing and showing off, between connection and performance, between being kind and needing to be seen as kind. A Stoic doesn't live to be accepted. They live in a way that they can respect themselves. That is the only standard you need. And slowly, you'll begin to realize you don't need anyone's approval to be yourself. You don't need the crowd's attention to feel worthy. And you no longer need to keep performing, because that stage exists only in your imagination. Step down, leave the role, and you'll see the world hasn't turned its back on you. It never noticed you as much as you thought, but that's not a tragedy. That's a gift. You're allowed to be wrong, allowed to change, allowed to live an imperfect but honest life. And when you live truthfully, only then can real relationships form. Only then can real conversations unfold. And only then does a real life, a life no longer terrified of judgment, begin to open up. 3. Mistakes are not monuments. When you stop performing, you begin to hear the sounds inside yourself, the echoes of the past, the mistakes you've made, the wounds not yet healed, but covered with busyness. The silence of real life, no longer filled with roles and expectations, confronts you with everything you once avoided. And most of that is the fear of being defined by your own mistakes. We live with memories as if walking along a path of monuments. Every stumble, every wrong word, every failure etched in your mind as an unbreakable landmark. You remember every look that made you feel small, every word that cut deep, every decision you regret. You don't just remember, you revere them, as if mistakes are proof of your unworthiness and you must forever bow to them. But the truth is, those mistakes are not monuments unless you build them and kneel before them every day. Think of one mistake that still haunts you, a careless comment, a broken promise, an impulsive choice that hurt someone. How long have you repeated it silently in your mind? How long have you used it to remind yourself you're not enough? And now ask yourself, if someone else made that same mistake, would you be as harsh on them? Likely not. You'd understand. Forgive, maybe even forget, but with yourself, you don't allow it. Because somewhere in your mind, you still believe perfection is a prerequisite for love. And once you fail, you're no longer worthy. Seneca was exiled, betrayed by the very man he served. He could have drowned in bitterness, but instead of erecting a monument to humiliation, he used the years that followed to write words that would illuminate thousands of years after. He understood, mistakes are not the end. They are simply turns on a path no one walks in a straight line. And only when you stop too long at a bend, turning it into a residence, do you become truly stuck. You weren't born to avoid mistakes. You were born to learn from them. And if you truly learn, then that mistake is no longer a failure, it becomes fuel. Every crack in the wall you once built is now a slit of light showing you the way out. Every flaw that once broke you is now a reminder of the strength it took to rise again. But the only condition is, stop framing them like relics. Allow them to pass instead of displaying them as a permanent verdict hanging over your head. Look at the people you admire. They didn't get where they are because they never failed. Quite the opposite. They've made more mistakes than you know, but they didn't let those define them. They fell, but didn't name themselves after the fall. They erred, but didn't let the error determine their worth. That's the difference between someone who matures and someone who lives in guilt. One learns, the other hides. One accepts imperfection, the other tries to mask it forever. There will be people who bring up your past mistakes not to help you grow, but to keep you beneath them. Don't listen and don't react. Because when you truly accept your past, no one can use it to shame you anymore. You regain control when you stop feeling indebted for your own humanity. You don't have to erase the past, you only have to look at it with calm eyes. It happened, you learned, and you are no longer that person. True freedom begins the moment you stop visiting the monuments of your mistakes each day. You begin to choose your direction instead of turning back in nostalgia. You begin to act instead of regret. You begin to live instead of trying to repair your image. No one gets far by staring into the rearview mirror, and no one finds happiness by living like they're paying for a crime. Forgive yourself, not because you are innocent, but because you are now awake enough not to repeat it. 4. Pain doesn't need to disappear. It needs to be transformed. Then, as you start to reprogram yourself, as you separate from the noise that tried to rewrite you, something else will rise from beneath all your efforts. The pain you never processed, no longer hidden by busyness, no longer blurred by distraction. It surfaces clearer than ever. And this is where most people turn back, but not the Stoics. They stay. They face the pain not to escape it, but to transform it. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is a signal. It doesn't arrive to destroy you. It arrives to reveal what still needs healing. Every wound you've ever carried is an unfinished chapter of your life. The problem isn't that you've been hurt, it's that you've never been quiet enough to understand why it still lives in you. In modern life, we're taught to move on quickly, to get over it, to stay positive, to push forward. But that rush only buries the pain deeper, where it works silently, damaging you from within without you ever knowing. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Pain doesn't block your path if you're willing to see it as part of it. But to do that, you must stop. You must sit in the discomfort you've always avoided. Don't focus on eliminating pain. It doesn't need to vanish. It needs to be witnessed and transformed. Just as fire can't be extinguished, but can be redirected into light. Pain, if suppressed, becomes bitterness. But if faced, it can become empathy, depth, and strength. We all carry unfinished stories. An insult never responded to, a betrayal never understood, a failure that silenced us for years. And if unaddressed, these fragments become the foundation for all our current behavior, distorting how we love, how we react, how we perceive others. The Stoics never denied emotion. They simply refused to be controlled by emotions that were never processed. They walked through the dark, not to become cold, but to retrieve the clarity stolen by unspoken pain. No one lives without wounds, but only some choose to turn those wounds into wisdom. Like someone who grew up with violence, if he never confronts that wound, he will repeat it onto others, onto himself, or in silence. But if he dares to sit with it, revisit the memory, ask questions, and forgive, not to forget, but to release, then that very memory becomes the foundation of compassion and inner strength. True power doesn't come from never being hurt. It comes from being able to look at the scar and say, "I was there, but I didn't stop there." Transformation is when your past no longer pulls you back, but fuels your way forward. That's when you tell your story not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not to be pitied, but to show others that it's possible to keep walking, even after you've once collapsed. Pain doesn't need to be erased from your life. It is a vital part of your growth. The Stoics didn't look away from pain. They opened their eyes and learned from it, because they understood. Pain is never meaningless if we dare to face it in silence with integrity. And sometimes, you don't need someone to heal you. You just need the courage to stop hiding your wounds. When you begin to transform your pain, you also become dangerous, not in a violent way, but in a grounded way that nothing can control you anymore. A man who's walked through darkness and is no longer afraid of it is a man who cannot be manipulated, cannot be broken by past wounds. And that is you if you're brave enough to stop running. Not running from your past, not running from your pain, but stepping into it and walking out as a completely different version of yourself. Not perfect, but untouchable from within. 5. Silent presence is more powerful than any display. And then, once you've faced your pain and transformed it instead of running from it, You enter a new state, quiet, free from the need to be seen. A state only those who've walked through deep wounds and remained standing can understand. Presence is not about being noticed. It's about not losing yourself in a world overloaded with noise. In a room full of people trying to speak, the one who remains silent the longest usually holds the most power. True strength doesn't lie in volume. It lies in the steadiness of the mind. A man who doesn't need to prove who he is becomes the one others fear the most. Because he doesn't have to do anything, he only has to be there. And that presence, if cultivated through silence, discipline, and emotional control, becomes a kind of force that causes others to adjust their behavior simply because you are in the room. The Stoics understood this well. They didn't seek attention. They didn't react impulsively. They chose to be like a pillar of stone in a stormy sea. They didn't speak much. They didn't explain. But neither did they get swept up in chaos. In an age where everyone tries to perform through words, videos, likes, and comments, the mystery of someone quiet, grounded and deep, becomes the most striking form of power. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, Seneca once wrote. And you can only break free from those imagined fears when you are fully present in this moment, not carrying the past, not projecting the future, just being still in the now and in control of yourself. When you can do that, you no longer need to try becoming someone. You already are someone, and that can't be copied. Presence is a skill. It doesn't come from luck, it comes from training. Every time you refuse to react instantly, you train your presence. Every time you walk into a space and choose to listen before speaking, you build a self with weight. The one who talks the most isn't always the deepest, but the one who stays silent at the right time always causes others to pause. Not because they fear you, but because they sense something in you that can't be ignored. We live in a world where reaction is the default instinct. Replying to texts instantly, reacting to what others say, tweaking your image with every tiny gesture. But someone with true presence doesn't operate that way. He knows. Every rushed reaction is a sign of inner instability. And Stoics don't live to be controlled. They live to master first and foremost themselves. Silent presence is when you can walk into a meeting and say very little, but everyone looks your way when something important needs to be decided. When you sit calmly in a heated debate and others slowly match your tone. When you make no effort to impress, but people can't forget you after you leave. That's not communication skill, that's the result of inner depth forged through discipline. Through stillness, through facing your pain without broadcasting it. When you're fully present, not for a role, not for approval, but because you know who you are and choose to stand like a rooted tree, you begin to shift the rhythm of the world around you. You don't need to race. The world will adjust its pace just to keep up with you. And that's something no book can teach. You have to live through layers of pain, disappointment, and silent years to arrive there. When you no longer need to prove, to be liked, or to fear being misunderstood, you become an unshakable version of yourself because you're no longer an echo of anyone else. You're a point of stillness in a chaotic world. And someone like that, even without saying a word, is the one most deeply heard. 6. Patience is the highest form of strength. When you begin to be fully present, not to be seen, but because you no longer want to be swept away, one truth will quickly reveal itself. Life moves much slower than the fevered rush in your mind. And in that very gap, you must learn something no one likes, yet it forms the foundation of all inner power: patience. Patience is not passive waiting. It is the art of remaining grounded amidst things not yet arrived, not yet certain, not yet clear. The man who rushes for results is always prey to disappointment. But the one who waits, who sows the right actions and lets time do its part, will harvest what others didn't have the patience to see. Because real outcomes never arrive on your schedule. They arrive on the schedule of integrity and discipline. A man runs every morning not to see muscles by next week. He runs because he understands. Repetition doesn't need immediate reward. A man writes daily not to gain readers instantly, but because without writing, his soul feels confined. The one who builds something deep isn't the most talented, but the one who stays with the process long enough for the small to become great. Every time you practice patience, you declare to the world, "I'm not in a rush because I know I will get there." Epictetus once emphasized, "No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig." Everything solid comes from quiet repetition and not complaining. Like how stone is smoothed by water, not by one strike, but by thousands of soft drops. Strength doesn't lie on the surface. It lies in your ability to endure delay without losing your dignity. We live in an age where everything seems instant texts replied to immediately. Achievements showcased online, the fear of falling behind if you're not fast. But the things that matter, physical health, emotional stability, meaningful relationships, clear purpose, take time, and time cannot be bought. It can only be honored. Stoics don't live with the expectation of getting everything quickly. They live with the commitment to repeat what is right, even when no results are in sight. And that commitment is power, not to conquer others, but to avoid being defeated by your own impatience. Patience is what holds you back from rash decisions. The pause that prevents regretful words, impulsive actions, and giving up just because today was harder than yesterday. It keeps you loyal to the path you know is right, even if no one sees it, even if no one affirms you, even if no reward is obvious. The one who can be patient is the one who cannot be manipulated by instant desires. And someone like that is the most dangerous in any battle. In the end, you'll see, the one who goes far isn't the one who moves fast. It's the one steady enough to never stop. You don't need speed. You need depth. You don't need instant success. You need the right direction, and everything lasting will come to the one who doesn't quit just because results come late. Patience isn't glamorous, but it is the foundation of every victory that can't be taken from you. And you, if you dare to stay with yourself long enough, will be the one still standing when everyone else has already lost to their own restlessness. 7. Live with value, not just results. And once you've developed enough patience not to be deceived by speed, you'll begin to ask a different question, one that no longer revolves around, "What am I achieving?" but instead, "Who am I becoming?" Because life isn't just about measurable outcomes, it's about the values you leave behind once all the numbers have slipped through your fingers. That's when you move from outward conquest to inward purpose. Many people spend their whole lives measuring it by what they've acquired. A higher income, a better title, a wider reputation, but in the end, those things can make you feel like you've won without ever guaranteeing that you've lived meaningfully. The Stoics weren't against success. They just didn't worship it. They didn't measure their worth by public applause, but by the alignment between their actions and their inner values. You may not be recognized, but if you live in accordance with what you believe is right, you have not failed. To live with value is to not only ask, "What do I gain from this?" but also, "Are others better off because I was here?" Real value isn't found in what you take, but in what you leave behind. It could be a timely word of encouragement, a kind act when no one's watching, or a moral choice when no one's demanding you do the right thing. These things don't show up on performance reports, but they quietly shape how this world works through you, one decision at a time. When you live for value, you stop racing others. You begin to go deeper into yourself. You're no longer obsessed with being better than someone, but instead focused on becoming deeper than who I was yesterday. Value isn't a list of achievements. It's the depth of alignment between what you believe and what you do. It's when you don't have to say you're a good man, others sense it from what you refuse to do, even when you have the power to do otherwise. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What we do now echoes in eternity." And you only create that echo when your actions don't stem from a desire for applause, but from the awareness that every deed becomes part of the legacy you leave behind. You don't need to be a great man to live as if each day is your answer to the question, "What good did I use my life for in this world?" To live with value is to dare to stand for what's right even when you're alone, to hold to your principles even when it costs you, and to show kindness even when no one returns it. The Stoics didn't live to please the crowd. They lived not to betray themselves, and if results come, that's good, but if they don't, they remain whole. At the end of the road, no one remembers the things you once boasted about, but they will remember how you lived. And in every small act, each time you choose ethics over gain, patience over impulse, depth over appearance, you are rewriting the meaning of your life, not through success, but through value that cannot be replaced and that no one can take from you. I used to be the kind of person who always wanted to see quick results. After 3 days at the gym, I'd stand in front of the mirror looking for muscle. After a week of writing, I'd check the number of views. After filming a video, I'd refresh the view count every hour, but the more I did that, the more exhausted I felt. I was no longer doing it because I believed in it. I was doing it for numbers that were never enough. For a while, I felt like I was trying to build a house on sand, beautiful but hollow. Only when I returned to small habits, reading every morning, focusing on the act instead of the feedback, learning to stay silent in the face of meaningless comparisons, did I begin to understand what it meant to live with depth. No one remembers how many likes I got on some old post, but I remember it clearly. Each day I chose to keep my discipline, keep my silence, and keep myself. If this video helped you see the path back to your true inner strength more clearly, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming content. This isn't a place for motivation, it's a place to return to whenever you feel like you're drifting away from who you are. Live quietly but deeply. Stay silent but never invisible. See you in the next video.